Senator Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to support the motion of condolence and pay my respects and honour the massive contribution of former Prime Minister Edward Gough Whitlam to this country and to international affairs. I'd like to express my condolences to Gough's family, to Anthony, Nicholas, Stephen and Catherine. Their father was a remarkable Australian. And they were also honoured to have a remarkable mother in Margaret Whitlam. Margaret, Gough's wife and soulmate. Gough was a great intellectual, a great politician. He was an airman, a QC, he was a campaigner, and I heard Senator Abetz talk about roads, rubbish and stray dogs. In the Labour Party you do deal with roads, rubbish and stray dogs, and Gough Whitlam dealt with them in the western suburbs of Sydney. And he was a great orator and he was a great fighter. He was also extremely courageous. And I think, given what has been said here today, that politics provides great honour and great support to many individuals, it does bring about some brutal personal times. And I think that Gough Whitlam suffered some of the highest elements of political brutality against him and his government and his position. But he always was courageous. He always dealt with it with dignity. And he was always someone that you could look to and see a great deal of courage and intellectual capacity. I was not here in 1972, so I'm one of the few people of my vintage in this Parliament who can't remember the 1972 It's Time campaign. I came here in 1973, and when I look at the objectives of that It's Time campaign in 1972, there was two key objectives. One was to achieve basic changes in the administration and structure of Australian society. Given when I came here in 1973, looking at how Australian society was, I think that was a very, very prescient position to adopt, and certainly some of the changes that Gough Whitlam argued for then, we are still trying to deal with here. It was on equal opportunity was one of his issues, and the promotion of Australian ownership and control of industries and resources. That was something in 1973 I was very supportive of. Very supportive of. And when you look back since 1973 and you see the missed opportunities in Australian resources in this country, when you see what other countries have done around the world with some government intervention in terms of their industries, you see that what happened over that period of time was something that was a lost opportunity in terms of promoting Australian ownership, Australian control over our future through our resources. And I think that's something that we can look back on and say that Gough, in my view, had it right. There was a number of programmes. The Cities programme. I couldn't believe when I came here in 1973 from the UK, from Scotland, that there were still people in the western suburbs of Sydney didn't have reticulated sewerage. Did not have reticulated sewage. I couldn't believe it. That was probably the second shock after realising there was no colour TV in this country. And but it just showed that we were not at the cutting edge of social and economic reform in the 70s in this country. And in the early 70s, to have Gough Whitlam lay out such a prodigious position for social and economic change, to me, was fantastic. To me, personally, it was a great thing. The city's programme to put sewers in the outer suburbs of our Sydney cities was great. Changes to local government, changes to racial and gender discrimination. I again couldn't believe, coming from Scotland in '73, that Indigenous Australians could not go into some areas of pubs in the early '70s, that they were being told that they had to go out and couldn't have a drink in a pub. To me, just unbelievable. And that was one of the Whitlam programmes to make sure that discrimination was gone. Health. I came here from the British health system in 1973. And when I was told I had to take out private health insurance to make sure that my family were looked after, again, it was something that was foreign to me as someone who was a beneficiary of the health system in the UK, to see how far back the health system in the early '70s was in the UK. Again, another example of the Whitlam approach to bring about change that was good for society and good for individual Australians. On migrants, when I came in 1973, I first arrived in the Endeavour Hostel at South Coogee. This was a modern hostel built to help migrants integrate into the community, and that hostel was well resourced under the Whitlam government. The migrants who couldn't speak English had access to English language training. The children of the migrants could go to a creche in 1973. There was lots of money spent to try and allow the migrants to get engaged into Australian society. So it was, really, for me, that was one of the positives that we had. Now, the position that I found myself in when I came here was I didn't really know Gough Whitlam as such a figure. But I soon learnt that he was unquestionably the leader in Labour, and he was unquestionably the person who was directing the bulk of Labour's political agenda. He had some fantastic people around him, and some fantastic changes were made. And one of the changes, I think, which is not really understood over the period of time, is the giving ordinary Australians the access to the legal system. And in the early '70s, unless you had the money, you couldn't get access to the legal system. So that's another great change that Labour and Gough Whitlam implemented. But in 1973, my sort of political, the issues I was looking at when I first came here were the international issues. If you go back to then, it was Watergate. It was the first real public act of terrorism at the Benghazi airport, where an airplane was blown up on Benghazi airport. There was a CIA coup in Chile, where the Allende government was overthrown, and many of the people fleeing that I met in the hostel at South Coogee, looking for support and refuge in Australia. There was a coup in Greece. Idi Amin was still in Uganda. The Vietnam ceasefire was being negotiated, and PNG was just about to get self-government. And there was also the Tory sex scandals in the UK that dominated the press in the UK. But Australia, again, the issues that we were looking at were about trying to get this country engaged internationally. It was about trying to open the economy up. And many of the issues that were there, I didn't agree with. I didn't agree at the time about the 25% across-the-board tariff cut, because my job as a fitter in the engineering industry was protected by those tariffs. So my approach to trying to get on in this country was helped by that tariff, but the Whitlam government changed it. And it's interesting when you look back the Financial Review said this was undeniably one of the most forthright and courageous economic decisions by any Australian government. But it wasn't all, pushing for social change. It wasn't all trying to deal with what the Whitlam government wanted to do, because inflation was a problem and there was huge debates within the party, as I understand it at the time, on inflation. We were in a society that was still a pretty rugged society. Nothing more came to my mind than the 1973 grand final between Manly and Cronulla, when you watched people beating each other nearly to death on a football field. I couldn't understand what was going on, but that was the society in 1973 that we'd come into, and we've come a long way, and we've changed a lot of things since that time. I think in those days, we had number 96 on the television, and Abigail was saying that the casting couch was not a myth. So there was lots of things happening in Australia when I first came. We bought blue poles, and I think at that time a country party politician was saying it was a crazy idea. I don't think anyone in APS would now say that was a crazy idea. But I think Gough Whitlam also said that one of the greatest mistakes of the government was the ASIO raids by Lionel Murphy. I've got to tell you, I'm a bit of a Lionel Murphy fan. Lionel Murphy was a senator and a QC who actually was a good QC, just didn't talk about it. He was a good QC. And Lionel Murphy helped set up a system that we benefit from, and a system that everyone here benefits from, and that is the Senate committee system, where analytical approaches were taken to legislation, where we looked at that legislation in great detail. And it was the Whitlam government and Lionel Murphy who set that process up within the Senate. But there was that issue of ASIO, and I have to say, and take this opportunity at this time to say that I believe that if you are going to give more power to ASIO, and if you look at the history of ASIO in this country, then it is absolutely essential that the scepticism that the Whitlam government had about ASIO is kept loud and clear in this Parliament. That if you're going to give more power to the ASIO in this country, then the checks and balances must be increased. And the checks and balances in terms of ASIO must include proper parliamentary oversight. And if that becomes a legacy that's been fought for many years, and we get that, then we should do that. And I think it's important that that oversight take place, because, as I said, Gough Whitlam did indicate that position with ASIO was one of the biggest mistakes of the government. And in 1975, I must say, as a rank-and-file shop steward working in the power industry in the Hunter Valley, I was horrified that the Queen's representative could dismiss a democratically elected government. I couldn't think of many other countries where that could happen. And I was appalled. And I took industrial action with workers right around the country in protest against the dismissal of the Whitlam government. And in those days, let me tell you, many workers, certainly in the power industry, a rough and tough industry, didn't have a lot of money. And to take 2 days off work for a political issue was a big deal. It was a big deal. And it showed how rank-and-file workers, working-class people in this country, couldn't understand how this could have came about, and were absolutely appalled that the Governor-General, the representative of the Queen, could dismiss the elected government of the country. I've got to say, I was disappointed that the ACTU didn't organise more decisive and effective industrial action around the country at the time. As a rank-and-filer, I couldn't understand why Bob Hawke, the leader of the trade union movement at that time, wasn't as disgusted as I was. And what I thought was the rank-and-file view from working-class people around the country. And I was very, very committed to continuing to take industrial action. And I think if there had been maybe a change at that ACTU decision-making, of that ACTU decision, then history might have changed in this country, because there was a lot of nervousness. We know people were ready to cross the floor against the Senate leadership of the coalition, and we know that if we'd have hung out a bit, I think in hindsight, a bit longer, then things may have changed. But that's history and that's hindsight, and that's not what happened. But I just want to say today that Gough Whitlam gave me the drive and determination to participate in not just industrial politics, but parliamentary and party politics in this country. And I think he did that for many, many people. And it was so fantastic to see someone who stood up for their vision, who stood up for their politics, who stood up against all the attacks and did that with such dignity and such courage. And no one. That's the thing that stands out to me for Gough Whitlam. Not his intellect, which was, I think, unquestionable, and what people have all said was his intellect. It wasn't his biting sarcasm or his self-depreciation or his ego. It was none of those things. It was a leader who understood his values, who understood what was in the interest of the country, and was prepared to take that up despite the personal cost to Gough and his family. So he was a role model to many. He was an inspiration to many. And I just think that in future we always need to keep in mind that your values and your principles are so important in this game. That's what Gough Whitlam taught me, the values and the principles. And to be courageous in support of your values and principles. That's the lesson that Gough Whitlam gave me, and that's the lesson I think all political parties need to continue with. And I hope it's a lesson that's laid out for a long period of time. Valet Gough Whitlam, you have been a constant in my life since I've come to Australia. You will be sadly missed by Australians. You will be sadly missed by the body politic of this country. You have made a fantastic contribution to this great nation, and I think we owe Gough Whitlam a lot. Thank you.